saying this out loud, putting into words the weight I've carried inside me for years. It's so hard, but I'm tired of staying silent. I've stayed silent for years. I've been running for years, but I don't even know who I've been running from. Myself? The truth? Or maybe that little child who once grew inside me. It all started when I was 20, at a time when I was full of dreams about life. I was preparing for my college entrance exams. I believed I'd seize the opportunities life put before me, that someday everything would be perfect. Back then, there was someone I loved. The dreams I had with him were what kept me going. I loved him so much. I trusted him completely. But then something happened that I never expected. I found out I was pregnant. I was in shock. I was feeling emotions I had never felt before. I was both incredibly happy and absolutely terrified. But then I reassured myself. He loves me too. We'll get married and we'll raise our child together, I thought. That eased my fears a little. I even thought about surprising him with the news. I thought he'd be happy, that he'd be thrilled. But that's not what happened. When I told him I was pregnant, I'll never forget the look on his face. It was the coldest moment of my life. He looked at me and said just one sentence, "I'm not ready." And then he left. That day, he took all my hopes with him. I was devastated. My fears were growing. I had no idea what to do. For days, I tried to reach out to him. I wanted to talk to him, for him to take responsibility. I even went to his workplace to see him, but I couldn't reach him. He wouldn't talk to me. He was avoiding me. My fears grew every day, and I kept asking myself, what am I going to do? I couldn't bring myself to tell my family. The thought of seeing the disappointment in my mom and dad's eyes, I'd rather die than face that. So I came up with a desperate lie. I told them I'd passed the college entrance exams and that I was going to study in another city. They believed me so much that when I saw the pride in their eyes as I left, it felt like a knife cutting through me. I started a new life alone in a new city, with a baby growing inside me. I was broke and struggling, so I immediately started looking for work. I got a job as a dishwasher at a cafe. I worked 12-hour shifts, but the money barely covered my rent. I was just surviving. I thought about taking on a second job, but I didn't have the time. I managed to get by for 3 months. At the cafe, there were things I'd rather not even talk about. I had to quit. I couldn't stay there any longer. I started applying for jobs everywhere. At one place, the owner, a woman, told me I could clean houses. She even said, "You can start with mine if you'd like." I was so happy. I said, "I can come tomorrow." She agreed. Thanks to her, I started making a living cleaning houses. By then, my belly was starting to show. Feeling my baby inside me, I kept thinking that he didn't deserve this struggle. But there was nothing I could do. My days were filled with stress, sadness, and worry. Eventually, the time came for me to give birth. I went to the hospital alone. Being wheeled into that tiny room with no one around me made my heart ache even more. But when I held him in my arms, I forgot everything. My son. When his eyes met mine, it was like he understood all my pain. But I didn't know what to do. How could I raise him on my own when I was freezing at night, starving, and broke? I managed for a few days. I was breastfeeding him, but I was starving too. I could feel my milk drying up. The fear that I wouldn't be able to feed him, that he'd go hungry, was driving me insane. I had to find a solution. One night, I made a decision. I went to the door of a house I thought belonged to a wealthy family. I wrapped my tiny baby in a warm blanket. I left a note. "Please take care of him." I rang the bell and ran. I watched from a distance. When the door opened, a woman picked him up and brought him inside. Once they were both inside, I collapsed on the cold ground. I cried. My tears mixed with the frozen stones as my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Since that day, my life has never been the same. I worked day and night, struggled, but nothing ever went right. Every night, I prayed I'd see my son's face again. But life was cruel to me. I was so full of regret for leaving him, but I had no other choice. I couldn't care for him. I couldn't feed him, keep him warm. At least he deserved a better life. 2 years passed. Whenever I could, I'd watch them from a distance. My son was 2 years old. The family I'd left him with was taking good care of him. They spent time with him, and he seemed happy. I could see it. From afar, I felt both heartbroken and relieved. At least he had a warm bed and good food, I told myself. I was trying to comfort myself. Then I met a man. He told me we could build a life together. He was a good person. He was financially stable and my life could change. But I couldn't trust him. I was scared. I told him everything. I was honest. I told him I had a child, that my family didn't know, that my ex had abandoned me and ruined my life. He asked about my child. I told him I had given my baby to a family to adopt. He was surprised. He hadn't expected a story like mine. That day, he left. The next day, he wanted to meet again. "I've thought about it," he said. "I want to marry you and be with you, but I have one condition. If we're going to get married, that child cannot be in our lives. I can't explain this to my family. They wouldn't accept it." He was right. Who would want someone like me? I told him I needed time to think. I couldn't decide right away. I stayed up all night, thinking. I had to make a decision. I couldn't take my son back from the family now anyway. Even if I did, I still wouldn't be able to care for him. If I married this man, I'd never see my son again. Then I thought, he's happy with his family. You should try to be happy too, for once. I convinced myself that when my life got better, I'd find a way to get my son back. But I was fooling myself. We got married, and I moved in with his family. The first few months were nice. They treated me well. But then, out of nowhere, their attitude toward me changed. His mom was a sharp and dominant woman. She must have looked into my past. Otherwise, why would she start treating me poorly when there hadn't been any problems? My life started falling apart again. Things between my husband and me got strained. I tried to fix it, to figure out what was wrong, but I couldn't. He wouldn't tell me either. Somehow, we got through a year of issues. Then he told me he wanted a divorce. He had already filed for it. I couldn't say anything. I didn't even protest. They crushed me. The divorce was finalized at the first hearing. My miserable life began all over again. Clearly, men weren't the answer for me. I told my parents about the divorce. My dad was understanding. I moved back in with my family. At least there, I didn't have to worry about making ends meet. They took care of me. Years passed like this. My regret only grew deeper. That cold, dark, desperate night when I left my son haunted my dreams every single night. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to talk to my son. I went to the house where I'd left him and knocked on the door. The woman who raised him answered. I told her everything. She stood there, tears in her eyes, and said, "He's our son now. The day you had the courage to leave him, we took him in and loved him like our own. You can't take him away from us now." But I was determined. I wanted my son back. No matter what, I was going to take him back and tell my family everything. Just then, my son came to the door. He was 5 years old, a handsome little boy. He had grown so much, and his eyes were full of light. "Mom, who's at the door?" he asked. In that moment, everything in my mind changed. He knew her as his mom and loved her. My throat tightened, and I couldn't say anything. I turned around and walked away, tears streaming down my face. And I realized that he'd had a much better life without me. Today, as I make this confession, I know that if life gave me another chance, I'd do everything differently. But the past doesn't come back. The dream of looking into my son's eyes and hearing him call me Mom is now just a fantasy. And now, maybe one day, This story will reach his ears. Maybe one day he'll understand me, or maybe he'll never forgive me. But I want you to know, my son, that the day I left you in the cold, I was just trying to save you. I've loved you more than anything, always. But I wasn't strong enough to show you that. Life has never been fair to me. Today, I'm making this confession to express all my regret and find a little peace. My final words to you. I love you so much.